My brothers and sisters in Christ, in yesterday's first reading, we heard Paul challenge us to not bring worldly attitudes into our faith, that we in the Christian community are called to a higher moral plane, if you will, that we are to not only think in terms of what God reveals to us, but to love each other to a greater standard than the people of the world do, to pursue a higher form of justice than the people of the world do, that we are called to a higher ideal. And so in this same vein of rejecting worldliness, we get today's reading, which is a little unfortunate in that we lose the connecting passages. The shortness, the number of days that we get to spend in 1 Corinthians is not long enough to make a full reading of the whole letter. So we jump a chapter and a half from yesterday to today. But as chapter 7 progresses, we get this treatment as Paul goes from just moral, or what we could say the pursuit of virtues or rejection of vice, to one state in life, the things that attach us to the world. And so this gets into this thing that, first of all, seems very bizarre to the modern ears if we don't understand the context in which he says it. He addresses slaves and slave owners, something obviously very sensitive in our sensibility today. Some have used it to even accuse that the early church was okay with slavery, which, of course, was not the case at all. What Paul is saying, first to them, is to not pursue just constantly this change in the state of things, but instead to seek sanctity at whatever mode of life you're in. This then gets us to where, and I understand without being able to unpack it, why the lectionary skips that passage. But today, we get then the treatment not only to remain as you are, as he said to that case of a kind of a class struggle, but in terms of marriage. So today he speaks that for those, and he makes it clear that this isn't a divine commandment, that he's just giving his opinion, but that it's better for those unmarried to stay unmarried, that those who are married or betrothed should stay that way. And it goes on to this whole treatment of how one should be freed to have their eyes fixed on the things of God, which is ultimately what's at the heart of this passage. So he speaks, and in this, Paul almost seems to not have an immediate sense, which is very possible, of what we get, for example, in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus is teaching that it's better for those to be celibate if possible, but that's not possible for all people. Paul seems to arrive at the same conclusion, which is for those so called or so given the grace, it's better for the unmarried to remain that way. Likewise, he doesn't say if you're married or betrothed that you should split up from your spouse or your fiance. But what he is speaking to is that people in life tend to, with a strong purpose, go about seeking these various stepstones or status moments in life, and that this can become a distraction from seeking the things of God. This is Paul's ultimate point, that Christians should have their eyes fixed on eternal realities. Therefore, we should pursue things only to the extent in which God gives us that calling. What does this mean immediately for us? This comes to vocational discernment. So, for example, not everyone is called to celibacy. In fact, if someone pursues it that has not been given that grace, it may not go well. But then this is why for someone to be called a priest, they must, independently discern the call to celibacy as a quality, that God is calling you to live more radically this focus on eternal reality. In the same way, those not called to priest or to priesthood or religious life, marriage is not just something that happens by default. Marriage is something to which one is called. And so often I can talk to people who, whether it's of seeking their spouse or seeking having children, perhaps struggles with fertility, whatever it might be, that there is a desperate yearning to see through this field. They feel almost rejected by God that they haven't found the one yet, or they haven't had the child yet, because this is something that seems expected. And the absence of it, therefore, is received as a loss or a rejection. And while fully acknowledging the strong feelings that come with these subjects, this also is a sign that we need to always be fixing our eyes on, well, what is God asking of me? Not what do I expect, but what has God created me to do? What gift is God pouring out on me where I will find the fullness of peace and joy? Sometimes we just see it as what cross am I called to bear, and that is real in the spiritual life as well. But all things that we are given in this life, and that includes our state of life, our vocations, our occupations, all of these things are to help us in the pursuit of heaven. And so these can all be wonderful things as long as they help us in that pursuit. But it's possible that these earthly concerns can become an impediment. And especially they're more of a danger to become so if we follow something God is not asking of us. But these things can become an impediment if they become all-consuming of our time and intention. As the saying of the gospel goes, where, what one loves, there's one treasure is found. And so if our eyes are turned to heaven, our treasure can be found there. But if all of our love and attention is poured into merely earthly things, then that's where we'll be found. We'll be missing that which is most essential. And so, my brothers and sisters, this has been a bit of a rambling reflection here, I admit. But today's reading about state of life and marriage and unmarriage and virginity or lack thereof ultimately is another way of Paul pointing us to seek the things of God, to discern God's will, not just to chase the things that I think God would naturally give me, but to truly seek, what does God will for me? Because when I align my will with God's, that is where joy and fulfillment will be found. God does not seek to punish us or deny us goodness, but sometimes we suffer because we seek things out of our own will and not His. But may we turn our eyes to heavenly realities and find our treasure in heaven. May God bless you.